Dorothy Williams had lived in the same house for almost 15 years. Every morning, without fail, she'd wake up at 6 o'clock, make herself a cup of black coffee, and walk outside to raise the American flag on the pole in her front yard. Rain or shine, it didn't matter. That flag went up and Dorothy would stand there for a moment, her hand over her heart, remembering all those years she'd spent in uniform. At 78 years old, she moved a little slower than she used to. Her knees ached on cold mornings, and sometimes her hands trembled when she gripped the flag rope. But she never missed a day. To Dorothy, that flag meant something. It represented 30 years of her life. 30 years of service, sacrifice, and pride. She'd earned the right to raise it, and nobody could take that away from her. The neighborhood was quiet, the kind of place where people kept to themselves. Dorothy liked it that way. She'd garden in the afternoon, pulling weeds from around her tomato plants and trimming the hedges that lined her driveway. Neighbors would wave as they drove past, and she'd wave back. Pleasant enough, but distant. After spending decades giving orders and leading soldiers, Dorothy had learned to enjoy her solitude. That Tuesday started like any other. She'd gone to the grocery store around 3 in the afternoon, picking up the usual things. Bread, eggs, some fresh vegetables, a small piece of fish for dinner. The cashier, a young woman who'd seen Dorothy come in every week for years, smiled and asked how she was doing. Dorothy smiled back and said she was doing just fine, thank you very much. The drive home took less than 10 minutes. As she turned onto her street, Dorothy noticed a pickup truck parked in front of her house. It was an old beat-up thing, primer gray with rust spots along the doors. She didn't recognize it, but that wasn't unusual. Sometimes people parked on the street when they were visiting neighbors, but as she got closer, her stomach dropped. 3 men were standing in her driveway. One of them was holding a spray paint can, and Dorothy could see fresh marks on her garage door. Dark red paint dripped down the white surface, forming words she'd hoped she'd never have to see aimed at her again. She pulled into the driveway, her heart pounding. The men turned to look at her, and not one of them seemed concerned about being caught. They were young, probably in their 20s and 30s, wearing jeans and work boots. One had a baseball cap pulled low over his eyes. Another had his arms crossed, a smirk on his face. Dorothy got out of her car slowly, trying to keep her hands steady. 30 years in the military had taught her how to handle confrontation, but those days felt very far away right now. She was an old woman standing in her driveway, facing 3 men who clearly didn't respect her or her property. "What do you think you're doing?" Her voice came out firm, stronger than she felt. The man with the spray paint can laughed. "Just decorating a little." "Don't you like it?" Dorothy's eyes moved to the garage door. The words were ugly, hateful, the kind that cut deep no matter how many times you'd heard them before. She'd faced this kind of hatred during her early years in the service, back when being a black woman in the military meant constantly proving yourself. She thought those days were behind her. "You need to leave. Now." Dorothy reached into her purse for her phone. "I'm calling the police." That's when things got worse. The man in the baseball cap stepped forward. "You're not calling anybody, lady." Dorothy's fingers closed around her phone, but before she could pull it out, the third man moved quickly, grabbing her wrist. The suddenness of it shocked her. Her purse fell to the ground and her phone clattered onto the concrete driveway. "This is what happens," the man said, his face close to hers, "when people don't know their place." Dorothy tried to pull her arm free, but his grip was too strong. Fear shot through her, real and cold. She'd been in dangerous situations before, but that was decades ago, when she was younger and stronger. Now she was just an elderly woman being held by someone who could easily overpower her. "Let me go." She tried to sound commanding, the way she used to when she needed her soldiers to follow orders. But her voice shook. The man with the spray paint laughed again. "Tough old bird, aren't you? Bet you think you're special living in this nice neighborhood." He said other things too, ugly things that Dorothy tried to block out, words that reduced her entire life, all her service and sacrifice down to nothing but the color of her skin. Then he shoved her. Dorothy stumbled backward, her feet tangling beneath her. She felt herself falling, and there was nothing she could do to stop it. Her hip hit the driveway first, then her elbow, pain exploding through her body. She lay there stunned, staring up at the 3 men standing over her. They were laughing. "Maybe next time you'll think twice," one of them said. Through the ringing in her ears, Dorothy heard a truck door slam. Tires squealed as they drove away, leaving her lying on her driveway in the late afternoon sun. Her elbow was bleeding, and when she tried to move, her hip screamed in protest. For a long moment, she just lay there. The sky above was clear and blue, peaceful. Birds were singing somewhere nearby. It seemed wrong that the world could be so calm while she felt like everything had just shattered. She heard a door open, footsteps approaching. Her neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, came running over, her face pale with shock. "Oh my God, Dorothy. Are you okay?" "I saw the whole thing from my window. I should have come out sooner. I'm so sorry. I was scared and I didn't know what to do. Help me up," Dorothy said quietly. Mrs. Patterson helped her stand, and Dorothy bit back a groan as pain shot through her hip. Her elbow was scraped raw, blood running down her arm. But worse than the physical pain was the feeling of violation, of helplessness. She'd survived war zones. She'd led soldiers through impossible situations. And now, in her own driveway, she'd been knocked down by 3 cowards who attacked an old woman. Mrs. Patterson wanted to call an ambulance, but Dorothy refused. She just wanted to get inside, away from the hateful words still dripping down her garage door. Mrs. Patterson helped her into the house and insisted on cleaning her wounds, bringing ice for her hip. "I'm calling the police," Mrs. Patterson said. Dorothy nodded, but she felt numb. Would the police even care? An old woman attacked in her driveway, some racist graffiti on a garage door. She'd heard stories about how these things went. Reports filed, nothing done. After Mrs. Patterson left, Dorothy sat in her living room, staring at her shattered phone on the coffee table. Mrs. Patterson had picked it up from the driveway, but the screen was completely destroyed. Dorothy held it in her trembling hands, feeling more alone than she had in years. Then she remembered something. Getting up slowly, she walked to her desk in the corner of the room. She opened the bottom drawer and pulled out an old address book, the kind with a worn leather cover and pages yellowed with age. She hadn't looked at it in years. Inside were names, phone numbers, addresses. Some were crossed out, updated over time. These were her people, her squad, the soldiers she'd served with for years. The ones who'd called her Sarge, who'd trusted her with their lives, who'd become more like family than fellow soldiers. It had been almost 30 years since she'd retired. Would they even remember her? Would they care about some old woman's problems? But as Dorothy sat there, her body aching and her pride wounded, she realized she had nothing to lose. She picked up Mrs. Patterson's phone, which her neighbor had insisted she keep for the evening. Her finger traced down the list of names until she found the one she was looking for. She dialed the number, not even sure if it was still good after all these years. The phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Then a man's voice answered. "Hello?" Dorothy's throat tightened. "Is this Tommy Chen?" There was a pause. "Yes, who's this?" "Tommy, it's Dorothy Williams. Your old Sergeant Major from the 47th Division." Another pause, longer this time. Then his voice changed completely, filled with warmth and surprise. "Sarge, is that really you?" And for the first time since being knocked to the ground in her own driveway, Dorothy Williams felt a flicker of hope. Tommy Chen was in his garage, working on an old motorcycle he'd been restoring for the past 6 months when his phone rang. He almost didn't answer. The number wasn't saved in his contacts, and these days, most unknown numbers were just spam calls trying to sell him something or scam him out of his credit card information. But something made him pick up. Maybe it was instinct, that same gut feeling that had kept him alive during his years in the service. When he heard the voice on the other end say his name from 30 years ago, his hands froze on the wrench he'd been holding. "Sarge, is that really you?" He hadn't heard Dorothy Williams' voice in decades, but he'd never forget it. That was the voice that had talked him through his first combat experience when he was 22 years old and terrified. That was the voice that had pulled him aside after he'd made a stupid mistake and corrected him firmly but fairly. That was the voice that had told him he was going to be okay when he thought he wouldn't make it home. "Tommy, I need help." Dorothy's voice cracked, and that scared him more than anything. Sergeant Major Williams never sounded like that, never. "What happened? Are you okay?" As Dorothy told him about the attack, about being shoved to the ground in her own driveway, about the hateful words spray-painted on her garage, Tommy felt his jaw tighten. His wife, Linda, came into the garage and immediately noticed the change in his expression. She mouthed, "What's wrong?" But he held up a hand. "Where are you now? Are you hurt? Did you call the police?" Dorothy explained about her injuries, about the police report that had been filed, about how alone she felt sitting in her house with her garage covered in hate. "Listen to me. Sarge, Tommy said, his voice steady and certain. "You're not alone. Not anymore. I'm going to make some calls. Just sit tight, okay? We're coming." After he hung up, Linda stood in front of him with her arms crossed. "What's going on? Remember I told you about my old sergeant major? The one who basically saved my life more times than I could count?" Linda nodded. She'd heard the stories over the years. Someone attacked her. 3 men. She's 78 years old and they knocked her down in her driveway. Linda's hand went to her mouth. "Oh my God." Tommy was already scrolling through his phone, looking for numbers he hadn't dialed in years. "I need to make some calls. This might take a while." The first person he called was Ray Johnson. Ray had been the squad's medic, the guy who could patch up anything from a minor cut to a bullet wound. Now he ran a small medical supply business in Texas. Ray answered on the second ring. "Tommy Chen? Is this really you, man?" "Ray, listen. It's about Sarge." That was all he needed to say. Ray's tone changed immediately. "What happened?" Tommy explained, and before he'd even finished, Ray was already talking. "I can be on a plane tomorrow morning. First flight out. Send me the address." Next was Deshaun Porter. Deshaun had been the youngest member of their squad, barely 19 when he joined. Now he was 52, working as a high school teacher in Georgia. When Tommy told him what happened, there was a long silence on the other end. "They put their hands on Sarge?" Deshaun's voice was quiet, dangerous. "Nobody touches Sarge. I'll call my principal right now, get a substitute for my classes. I can be there by tomorrow night." One by one, Tommy worked through the list. Not everyone answered right away. Some numbers were disconnected. A few people had moved, and he had to track them down through social media. But every single person he reached had the same reaction. They were coming. Kevin O'Brien, who now worked construction in Michigan, said he'd drive through the night. Patricia Vega, who'd become a nurse in California, booked a red-eye flight before they'd even finished talking. Billy Wu, who ran a small restaurant in New York, told his brother to cover for him and started packing immediately. By midnight, Tommy had contacted 8 members of their old squad. 3 others he couldn't reach, but he left messages, sent texts, posted in an old military social media group they'd all joined years ago but rarely used. He created a group text with everyone he'd reached. The messages started flying immediately. "What's the plan? Who's getting there first? Does Sarge need anything? I swear if I get my hands on those guys, focus. We need to be smart about this." Tommy took charge, just like old times. He sent Dorothy's address, organized who was arriving when, suggested a nearby hotel where they could stay. He reminded everyone to stay calm, to think clearly, to remember their training. "We're not going in there looking for a fight," he typed. "We're going to protect Sarge and make sure she gets justice. The right way." But underneath the practical planning, there was something else. A fury, cold and controlled, that every single one of them felt. You could hurt them. You could insult them. They dealt with plenty of that over the years. But you didn't touch one of their own, and you definitely didn't touch the woman who'd looked after them, trained them, and brought them home safely. Dorothy represented something to all of them. She'd been their leader during some of the hardest times of their lives. She'd been firm when they needed discipline and compassionate when they needed understanding. She'd written letters of recommendation that helped them get jobs after they left the service. She'd attended weddings, sent cards when their children were born, and checked in on them over the years, even as life pulled them in different directions. They owed her everything. As Tommy finally went to bed that night, Linda rolled over to look at him. "You're really going?" "I have to." "I know," she said softly. "I'm proud of you. Just be careful, okay?" "Always am." But Tommy didn't sleep much that night. He kept thinking about Dorothy, about how scared she must have felt, about how wrong it was that she'd been attacked in her own home. This was a woman who'd served her country for 3 decades. She'd earned respect, earned peace in her retirement. Instead, she'd been terrorized by cowards who attacked an elderly woman. By 6 the next morning, Tommy was on the road. He'd thrown some clothes in a bag, kissed Linda goodbye, and started the 8-hour drive to North Carolina. His phone kept buzzing with updates from the others. Ray had caught his flight and would land by noon. Deshaun was driving and would arrive around dinner time. Patricia's plane was delayed, but she'd be there by tomorrow morning. Kevin was driving straight through, surviving on coffee and energy drinks. Dorothy called Tommy mid-morning, using her neighbor's phone again. She sounded tired but a little stronger than the night before. Tommy, you don't all need to come. I know you have lives, jobs, families. I shouldn't have called and bothered you with this. Sarge, with all due respect, that's the dumbest thing I've ever heard you say. Tommy's voice was gentle but firm. We're coming because we want to. Because you do the same for any of us. Actually, you did do the same for all of us. More times than we can count. He heard her breath catch on the other end. We're family, Sarge. Maybe we lost touch over the years. Maybe we got busy with our lives and forgot to call. But that doesn't change what we are. You took care of us when we needed it. Now it's our turn. There was silence and then Dorothy's voice thick with emotion. Thank you, Tommy. Don't thank me yet. Wait until you see what a bunch of old soldiers look like trying to figure out how to use their smartphones to coordinate everything. That got a small laugh out of her, which made Tommy feel better. The group text kept buzzing throughout the day. Someone had created a name for their chat. Sarge's squad, reunited. They shared memories as they traveled, funny stories from their time in service, updates on their kids and grandkids. It was like no time had passed at all. But underneath the jokes and reminiscing, there was steel. They were coming together with a purpose. 3 men had made a terrible mistake. They'd attacked someone who was protected by bonds that didn't break just because time had passed. As Tommy crossed the state line into North Carolina, he sent a message to the group. 2 hours out. Who else is close? Ray responded immediately. Landing in 30 minutes. Rented a car. I'll get there just after you. Right behind you, Kevin typed. And I'm bringing my toolbox. That garage needs fixing. Patricia sent a photo of herself on the plane, 6 hours out. Save some work for me. As the sun began to set, Tommy pulled onto Dorothy's street. He saw the house number she'd given him and pulled into the driveway. His eyes immediately went to the garage door and his jaw clenched. The words were still there, ugly and hateful, but they wouldn't be for long. Dorothy opened the front door, moving slowly, and Tommy saw the bruises, saw how carefully she walked. It made his blood boil, but he kept his face calm. He walked up to her, and for a moment they just looked at each other. Then Dorothy smiled, really smiled, for the first time since the attack. You actually came. Of course I came, Sarge. Tommy pulled her into a careful hug. And I brought reinforcements. By the time the sun came up the next morning, 6 members of the old squad had arrived at Dorothy's house. They'd stayed up late, drinking coffee and catching up, but when dawn broke, they were all awake and ready. Old habits died hard, and military training had a way of sticking with you even decades later. Dorothy stood in her kitchen, watching through the window as her former soldiers gathered in the driveway. Ray was examining the garage door, taking photos with his phone. Kevin had already opened his toolbox and was sorting through paint scrapers and brushes. Tommy was on his phone talking to someone, his expression serious and focused. It felt surreal. Yesterday she'd been alone, terrified, wondering if anyone would even care what happened to her. Today her driveway was full of people who'd dropped everything to come help her. People she hadn't seen in person for almost 30 years. Deshaun came into the kitchen moving quietly despite his size. He'd always been good at that, even when he was 19 and stumbling through basic training. Now he had gray in his beard and reading glasses hanging from a cord around his neck, but his eyes were the same. How are you feeling this morning, Sarge? Dorothy touched the bruise on her hip gently. It had turned a deep purple overnight. I've had worse. I know you have. But that doesn't mean this doesn't hurt. Deshaun pulled out a chair and sat down across from her. We're going to fix this, all of it. The garage, the legal stuff, everything. But first I need to ask you something. Dorothy raised an eyebrow. What's that? Are you okay? Really okay? Because what happened to you, that kind of thing, it messes with your head. Doesn't matter how tough you are. For a moment, Dorothy considered brushing off the question. She'd spent her whole career being strong, being the one everyone else leaned on. Admitting vulnerability didn't come easy. But looking at Deshaun, seeing the genuine concern in his eyes, something inside her softened. I was scared, she admitted quietly. More scared than I've been in a long time. And I felt helpless. That's what really got to me. I've faced down plenty of dangerous situations in my life, but this was different. I couldn't fight back, I couldn't protect myself. Deshaun nodded. That's normal, you know what's not normal? Attacking a 78-year-old woman in her own driveway. Those guys, they're cowards. And cowards always get what's coming to them eventually. Tommy appeared in the doorway. Sarge, can you come out here for a minute? We need to talk about the plan. Outside, the squad had gathered in a loose circle. Patricia had arrived an hour earlier, her flight landing just after sunrise. Billy Wu would be there by noon. 2 more were driving in and would arrive by evening. Okay, listen up, Tommy said, falling naturally into a leadership role. We've got multiple objectives here. First, we fix this garage. Kevin's already got the supplies we need and a few of us can knock that out today. Second, we need to deal with the legal side. Patricia, you know anything about hate crime laws in North Carolina? Patricia nodded. She'd become a nurse, but her brother was a lawyer, and she'd already been texting him all morning. I talked to my brother. He says if the police classified this as a hate crime, the attackers are looking at serious charges. But we need to make sure the investigation doesn't get buried. Sometimes these cases, especially in smaller towns, they get pushed aside. Which is why we need documentation, Ray added. Photos, witness statements, medical reports, everything official and by the book. We do this right, those guys won't be able to wiggle out of it. Dorothy listened as they planned, feeling something shift inside her. The fear from yesterday was still there, but it was getting smaller, crowded out by something else, hope maybe, or just the comfort of not being alone anymore. There's something else, Tommy said, his voice dropping lower. I did some digging last night. Couldn't sleep, so I started looking into things. That truck you described? I think I found it. Everyone went quiet. What do you mean you found it? Dorothy asked. Your neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, she gave the police a partial license plate number, remember? Well, I've got a buddy who works in the DMV database, called in a favor. There are only 3 trucks matching that description, with those plate numbers registered in this county. I've got addresses for all of them. Tommy, Patricia said carefully. What are you thinking? I'm thinking we pay them a visit. Let them know that Dorothy isn't alone, that if they try anything else, they're going to have to answer to all of us. No. Dorothy's voice was firm. Everyone turned to look at her. We're not going to their houses. We're not going to threaten them. That's not who we are. Sarge, they attacked you, Kevin said, frustration in his voice. They deserve to know they can't just get away with this. And they won't get away with it, Dorothy replied. But we're going to handle this the right way. Through the police, through the courts. We served our country to protect the law, not to take it into our own hands. I won't let those men turn us into something we're not. There was a moment of tense silence. Then Tommy nodded slowly. You're right, you're absolutely right, we do this clean. But, Ray said, a slight smile on his face, there's nothing wrong with us being visible, right? Nothing wrong with them seeing that Dorothy has people looking out for her. We're not threatening anyone. We're just here, supporting our friend. Dorothy thought about that. No, there's nothing wrong with that. The rest of the morning was spent working on the garage. Kevin and Billy, who'd arrived right on schedule, carefully scraped away the hateful words. They worked methodically, removing every trace of paint. Then they sanded the surface smooth and applied primer. While they worked, neighbors started to notice. Mrs. Patterson came over first, bringing homemade muffins and asking if there was anything she could do to help. Then Mr. Greenwood from 2 houses down stopped by, apologizing for not intervening during the attack and offering to install better security lights around Dorothy's property. By afternoon, word had spread through the neighborhood. More people stopped by. Some brought food. Others just wanted to express their support. A few admitted they'd seen the aftermath of the attack and felt guilty for not doing more. One neighbor, a young woman named Claire who lived 3 houses down, approached Dorothy with tears in her eyes. I saw those men spray painting your garage. I saw the whole thing from my window. I called the police right away, but I should have come outside. I should have done something more. Dorothy took her hand. You called the police. That was the right thing to do. I wouldn't have wanted you to put yourself in danger. But you were in danger, Claire said. And I just watched. Fear makes us freeze sometimes, Dorothy said gently. That's human. What matters is what you do next. You called the authorities. You gave a statement. That takes courage, too. By late afternoon, the garage door had been completely repainted. It was bright white, clean, with no trace of what had been there before. The squad stood back, admiring their work. "Looks good," Kevin said, wiping sweat from his forehead. "Better than good," Billy added. "Looks perfect." But Tommy was looking at something else. He'd been keeping an eye on the street all day, and now his expression had changed. "We've got company." A pickup truck was rolling slowly down the street. Old, beat-up primer gray with rust spots. The same truck from the attack. Dorothy felt her heart start to pound. The truck slowed as it passed her house, and she could see 3 men inside. They were staring at the gathered group in the driveway, at the freshly painted garage, at the 8 veterans who had stopped what they were doing and were now standing shoulder to shoulder. The truck stopped completely. For a long moment, nobody moved. Dorothy could feel the tension radiating from her squad. They weren't doing anything threatening, weren't making any aggressive moves. They were just standing there, a united front. One of the men in the truck, the driver, made eye contact with Dorothy. Then his gaze swept across the others. He seemed to be counting them, calculating. Tommy stepped forward, just slightly ahead of the others. He didn't say anything. He didn't have to. His stance said everything that needed to be said. "We're here. We see you. And we're not going anywhere." The driver's face went pale. He hit the gas, and the truck lurched forward, speeding away down the street. Ray pulled out his phone. "Got the full license plate this time. Clear as day. I'm sending this to the police right now." Dorothy realized she'd been holding her breath. She let it out slowly, feeling shaky but also strangely empowered. Those men had come back, probably to intimidate her again, to remind her that she was vulnerable. Instead, they'd found her surrounded by people who refused to let her stand alone. "Well," Deshawn said, breaking the tension, "I'd say they got the message." Patricia put her arm around Dorothy's shoulders. "They made a mistake coming back here. That truck, your neighbor's statement, the photos Ray took, it's all evidence. The police can't ignore this now." As the sun began to set, the squad gathered on Dorothy's front porch. They'd accomplished more in one day than Dorothy could have imagined. The garage was fixed. The evidence was documented. The neighborhood was rallying around her. And most importantly, she wasn't alone anymore. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. There would be police statements to give, lawyers to talk to, justice to pursue. But tonight, Dorothy sat surrounded by her family, the one she'd chosen all those years ago when they were all young and serving together. And for the first time since the attack, she felt safe. The police detective assigned to Dorothy's case showed up the next morning. His name was Detective Harrison, a middle-aged man with tired eyes and a coffee stain on his tie. He'd seemed moderately interested when the initial report was filed, but now, standing in Dorothy's living room with 8 veterans staring at him, his entire demeanor had changed. "Mrs. Williams," he said, pulling out a notepad, "I understand you have additional information about the incident?" Ray stepped forward before Dorothy could answer. "We have photos of the truck, a clear license plate number, multiple witness statements, medical documentation of her injuries, and video footage from a neighbor's security camera that shows the entire incident." Detective Harrison blinked. "Video footage? We didn't have that in the initial report." "That's because nobody asked the right questions," Patricia said, her voice pleasant but with an edge to it. "Mrs. Patterson, 2 doors down, has a Ring camera. Covers part of the street. We helped her download the footage last night." The detective's jaw tightened slightly. Dorothy could see him processing this, realizing that what he'd probably written off as a simple vandalism case had just become much more complicated. Tommy handed him a flash drive. "Everything's on here, time-stamped, organized, ready for you to review. We also have statements from 3 neighbors who saw the truck in the area before the attack." "You've been busy," Detective Harrison said, and it didn't sound like a compliment. "We're motivated," Deshawn replied. "When someone attacks one of our own, we take it seriously. We assumed the police would too." The detective's face flushed slightly. "Of course we take it seriously. We've been investigating." "For 2 days," Kevin interrupted. "With all due respect, we got more done in 24 hours than you did in 48. Now, are you going to use this evidence to make arrests, or do we need to take this to a higher level? There was a moment of tense silence. Dorothy watched Detective Harrison's face carefully. She'd dealt with enough bureaucracy in her military career to recognize when someone was deciding whether to be offended or pragmatic. He chose pragmatic. "I'll review the evidence immediately," he said, taking the flash drive. "If it's as comprehensive as you say, we'll move forward with arrests. These types of cases, hate crimes, they're taken very seriously by the department and the district attorney's office." "Good," Dorothy said quietly, "because this isn't just about me." Those men felt comfortable attacking an elderly woman in broad daylight. If they did it to me, they've probably done it to others. Or they will. Detective Harrison nodded, and for the first time, Dorothy saw something genuine in his expression. Maybe it was respect. Or maybe just the realization that he was dealing with people who knew how to organize and document a case better than he did. After he left, the squad gathered around Dorothy's kitchen table. The mood was cautiously optimistic, but still tense. "Think he'll actually do anything?" Billy asked. "He will now," Patricia said. "We've made it impossible for him not to. With all that evidence, if he sits on this case, it'll come back on him and the department." Tommy's phone buzzed. He looked at it and his expression darkened. "We've got a problem." Everyone turned to look at him. Local news just posted about this. Someone must have tipped them off. The story's already getting shared all over social media. He turned his phone around to show them. The headline read, "Veteran Squad Reunites After Racist Attack." Below it was a photo someone had taken of them all standing in Dorothy's driveway, the freshly painted garage behind them. "Is that a problem?" Dorothy asked. "It might be," Ray said slowly, "because now those three guys know we're here. And if they're the type to attack an elderly woman, they might be the type to do something stupid when they feel cornered." As if on cue, Dorothy's new phone rang. She'd gotten it that morning with help from Billy, who'd driven her to the store. The number was unknown. "Hello?" Heavy breathing on the other end. Then a voice, angry and slurred. "You think you're smart? Getting your little army together?" Dorothy's hand tightened on the phone. "Who is this?" "You know who this is. And you need to understand something, old woman. You just made this a whole lot worse for yourself." Tommy was already on his phone, recording. Patricia grabbed Dorothy's phone and put it on speaker. "Are you threatening me?" Dorothy asked, keeping her voice steady. "I'm promising you. You and your friends need to back off. Drop the charges, tell the cops you made a mistake, and maybe nothing else happens to that nice house of yours." "Let me explain something to you," Dorothy said, and her voice shifted into the tone she'd used with soldiers who needed a reality check. "I spent 30 years in the United States Army. I've faced down people a lot scarier than you. These people with me, they're not my army. They're my family. And we don't back down from bullies." There was a pause on the other end. "You're making a big mistake." "No," Dorothy said firmly. "You made the mistake. You made it when you put your hands on me, and now you're making it worse by calling me with threats. Did you know that threatening a witness is a felony? That we're recording this call? That you just gave us even more evidence to use against you?" The line went dead. Ray was already forwarding the recording to Detective Harrison. "Got it all. Clear audio, timestamped. That's witness intimidation on top of everything else." "They're panicking," Deshawn said. "That's good for us, bad for them. People make mistakes when they panic, but Tommy looked worried. They're also dangerous when they panic. We need to be smart about this. Starting tonight, we rotate watch shifts. 2 people awake at all times, keeping an eye on the house and the street." "You think they'll come back?" Dorothy asked. "I think they're cornered, and we've made it very public that we're here. Yeah, I think there's a chance they'll try something. But this time, we'll be ready." That night, the squad settled into a defensive routine that felt both strange and familiar. Kevin and Ray took first watch, sitting on the front porch with coffee and a clear view of the street. Tommy had brought a portable security camera that they set up covering the driveway. Patricia made sure everyone had each other's numbers and that their phones were fully charged. Dorothy tried to sleep, but it was difficult knowing her house had essentially become a fortress. She lay in bed listening to the quiet murmur of voices from downstairs and felt a complicated mix of emotions: gratitude that she wasn't alone, guilt that she'd dragged these people into her problems, pride that they'd come without hesitation, and underneath it all, anger at the situation that had forced this to happen in the first place. Around 2 in the morning, she heard a sharp whistle from downstairs. The signal they'd agreed on. Something was happening. Dorothy got up, moving as quickly as her sore hip would allow, and made her way to the living room. The lights were off, but she could see silhouettes gathered at the window. "What is it?" she whispered. "The truck," Tommy said quietly. "Same one from yesterday. It's been driving past the house every 15 minutes for the last hour." Dorothy moved to the window and peered out. Sure enough, she could see taillights disappearing around the corner. "They're trying to intimidate us," Deshawn said. "Classic harassment tactic. They want us to know they're out there, that they're watching." "Or they're casing the place," Kevin added. "Trying to figure out our patterns when we're alert, when we might be vulnerable." Billy was on his phone. "I'm calling the police. This is harassment, and combined with that phone call earlier, they're violating the law right now." 2 police cars arrived within 20 minutes. Dorothy watched from the window as the officers talked to Tommy and Ray on the front lawn. One of them was Detective Harrison, which surprised her. It was after 2 in the morning, yet here he was, responding to a call about her case. Maybe they'd finally gotten through to him. The truck made another pass while the police were there. This time, the officers saw it. One of the patrol cars immediately took off after it, lights flashing. Detective Harrison came up to the porch where Dorothy was standing. "We're going to post a car on this street for the next few days. This has gone beyond vandalism. These men are actively harassing you, and that phone call this afternoon was a clear threat." "Thank you," Dorothy said. "I reviewed all the evidence your friends compiled," he continued. "I'll be honest with you, Mrs. Williams. When I first got this case, I thought it was just another property crime. Ugly, sure, but nothing that would lead anywhere. I was wrong. What happened to you was a hate crime. And with the evidence you've gathered, we have a solid case. Warrants will be issued tomorrow morning." After he left, Dorothy stood on her porch with her squad gathered around her. A police car was now parked at the end of her street, a visible deterrent to anyone thinking about causing more trouble. "We did it," Patricia said softly. "We actually did it." "Not yet," Dorothy replied. "But we're close," Ray checked his watch. "Sun's coming up in a few hours. Who wants coffee?" As they filed back inside, Dorothy looked at the flagpole in her front yard. In a few hours, she'd raise the flag just like she did every morning. But tomorrow would be different. Tomorrow, she wouldn't be raising it alone. Tomorrow, justice was finally within reach. And tomorrow, 3 men who thought they could attack an elderly veteran without consequences would learn just how wrong they'd been. The arrests happened at dawn, just as Dorothy was making her morning coffee. Detective Harrison called to let her know before she heard it on the news. All 3 men were in custody, picked up from their homes without incident. The charges were extensive: assault, vandalism, hate crime enhancement, witness intimidation, and several other violations Dorothy didn't fully understand, but was grateful for nonetheless. She hung up the phone and walked outside to where Tommy and Ray were already awake, sitting on the porch steps with their own coffee mugs. "They got them," she said simply. Tommy nodded, a small smile crossing his face. "Good. That's real good, Sarge." Over the next few days, things moved faster than Dorothy expected. The district attorney's office, suddenly very interested in the case that was getting media attention, pushed for high bail amounts. 2 of the men couldn't afford it and stayed in jail. The third got out but was fitted with an ankle monitor and ordered to stay away from Dorothy's neighborhood. But something unexpected started happening. The story that had begun in Dorothy's driveway had spread far beyond her small street. The local news coverage went regional, then national. Suddenly, Dorothy was getting calls from journalists wanting interviews, veterans organizations reaching out to offer support, and people from all over the country sending letters and emails. One afternoon, about a week after the arrest, Dorothy sat at her kitchen table reading through a stack of messages. There was one from a veteran in Alaska who'd faced similar harassment, another from a widow whose husband had served and who wanted Dorothy to know she wasn't alone, a third from a high school class in Oregon that had studied her case and wanted to thank her for her service. Patricia sat down across from her. "You're becoming famous, you know." "I don't want to be famous," Dorothy said, setting down a letter from a retired general she'd never met. "I just wanted justice, I know. But this has become bigger than just your case. You've shown people that it's possible to fight back, to not let hate win. That matters to a lot of folks." The trial came faster than anyone expected. With the video evidence, the recorded phone call, and multiple witness statements, the defense attorneys advised their clients to take plea deals. The alternative was going to trial and almost certainly losing, with much harsher sentences. Dorothy attended every court hearing and she never went alone. At least 2 members of the squad were always with her, sitting in the courtroom in quiet support. The proceedings were complicated and sometimes boring, but Dorothy made sure she was there for all of it. These men had tried to make her feel small and powerless. She wanted them to see that they'd failed. The sentencing hearing was on a Thursday morning in October. The courtroom was packed. Dorothy's entire squad was there, along with neighbors, local veterans, and people from the community who'd never met her but felt connected to her story. The judge, a woman in her 60s with silver hair and sharp eyes, listened to the prosecution's recommendations. Then she asked if Dorothy wanted to make a statement. Dorothy hadn't prepared anything. She'd thought about it but couldn't find the right words. Now, standing at the podium in front of the judge, she spoke from her heart. "I spent 30 years serving this country," she began, her voice steady. "I did it because I believed in something bigger than myself. I believed in the idea that we're all equal, that we all deserve respect and dignity regardless of what we look like or where we come from." She paused, looking at the 3 men sitting at the defense table. They wouldn't meet her eyes. "What these men did to me, it wasn't just about paint on a garage door or bruises that will heal. They tried to take away my sense of safety. They tried to make me feel like I didn't belong in my own home, in my own country. A country I served for 3 decades. Her voice grew stronger. "But they failed. They failed because I'm not alone. They failed because there are good people who stand up against hate. They failed because justice still means something in this country." She took a breath. "I don't hate these men. I pity them. They're so consumed by hatred that they attacked a 78-year-old woman and thought they'd get away with it. I hope they use their time in prison to become better people. I hope they learn that the world is changing, and there's no place in it for the kind of hate they carried in their hearts." When she finished, the courtroom was silent. Then someone in the back started clapping. It was Deshawn. Soon the entire courtroom was applauding, and the judge had to gavel for order. The sentences were significant. The ringleader got 7 years in prison. The other 2 got 5 and 4 years respectively, along with probation, community service, and mandatory counseling. It wasn't everything Dorothy might have hoped for, but it was justice. As they left the courthouse, reporters crowded around asking for comments. Tommy and Ray formed a protective barrier around Dorothy, but she stopped and faced the cameras. "I want to thank the police for their work on this case," she said, despite her initial frustrations with how slowly they'd responded. "I want to thank the district attorney's office. But most of all, I want to thank my squad. These men and women dropped everything to come help me when I needed it most. That's what real strength looks like. Not the cowardly violence of attacking someone weaker than you, but the courage to stand up for someone who needs help." That evening, the squad gathered at Dorothy's house one last time. Most of them would be leaving over the next few days, heading back to their jobs and families and normal lives. They'd been away for almost 2 weeks and reality was calling them home. But before they left, they had one more thing to do. Kevin had been working on something in secret, sneaking off to a workshop across town between court appearances. Now he unveiled it. A beautiful wooden bench with a brass plaque that read, "Sarge's Squad, United We Stand." "For your front yard," he explained. "So you can sit out here and remember that you're never really alone." They installed it together right next to the flagpole. As the sun set, Dorothy sat on the new bench surrounded by her family of choice and felt something she hadn't felt in a very long time. Peace. The next morning, they started saying their goodbyes. Ray was first, his flight leaving early. Then Patricia and Billy, who were driving back together. One by one, they hugged Dorothy, promised to stay in touch, and headed home. Tommy was last to leave. He stood with Dorothy in her driveway, his rental car packed and ready to go. "Thank you," Dorothy said.
"For everything. You don't have to thank me, Sarge. You never have to thank any of us."
"You saved our lives more times than we could count when we served together. This was just us returning the favor." "It was more than that," Dorothy insisted. "You gave me back something I'd lost. My faith in people. My sense of family," Tommy smiled. "That goes both ways. I hadn't seen most of these folks in decades. I'd gotten so caught up in my own life that I forgot what we used to have. You brought us back together. You reminded us who we are." After he left, Dorothy stood alone in her driveway for a moment, but she didn't feel alone. She could feel the presence of her squad, Even though they were hundreds of miles away, that connection, forged in service and strengthened through this ordeal, wasn't going anywhere. 3 months later, Dorothy got a call from Tommy. The squad had been talking, and they had an idea. There were other veterans out there facing similar situations, elderly soldiers dealing with harassment, abuse, or neglect, people who'd served their country and deserved better in their retirement. What if we did something about it? Tommy asked. What if we created an organization, a network of veterans helping veterans? We could call it The Last Watch. Dorothy smiled, sitting on her bench in the front yard, the flag waving gently above her. Tell me more. By the end of the year, The Last Watch was officially established. It started small. Just the original squad members responding to cases they heard about through veterans networks. But word spread quickly. Within 6 months, they'd helped 15 elderly veterans. Within a year, that number had tripled. Dorothy became the face of the organization, traveling to speak at veterans events, sharing her story, and inspiring others to stand up against abuse and injustice. She was busier at 79 than she'd been in years, and she loved every minute of it. The 3 men who'd attacked her were still in prison, facing their consequences, but Dorothy rarely thought about them anymore. She was too focused on the future, on the good work being done, on the lives being changed. One evening, a young reporter asked her if she regretted making that phone call to Tommy, if she wished she'd just handled everything quietly. Dorothy looked at the reporter like she'd asked the silliest question in the world. Regret it? That phone call saved my life, not just because my squad came to help, but because it reminded me of something I'd forgotten. We're not meant to face our battles alone. We're stronger together. Always have been, always will be. She paused, looking at the flag in her front yard, the bench where she sat every morning with her coffee, the garage door that showed no trace of what had happened there. Those men tried to break me. Instead, they gave me a purpose. They reminded me that the fight for dignity and justice never really ends, and they showed me that even at 78 years old, I still had something to contribute to this world. The reporter smiled. What would you say to someone facing a similar situation? Someone who feels alone and powerless? Dorothy thought for a moment. I'd tell them to reach out, to call that old friend they haven't talked to in years, to ask for help from their community, to remember that they're not as alone as they feel. And I'd tell them that standing up for yourself isn't just about you. It's about everyone who comes after you. It's about making the world a little bit better, a little bit safer, a little bit more just. She stood up from her bench, straight and proud despite her age, and I'd tell them that it's never too late to fight for what's right. Never too late to make a difference. Never too late to remind the world that you matter. As the sun set behind her house, Dorothy walked inside, ready for whatever tomorrow would bring. She was no longer just a retired soldier living quietly in a small house. She was a voice for justice, a symbol of resilience and proof that one person with the right support could stand against hate and win. And most importantly, she was never, ever alone again.